Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. Have you ever taken a look around your game room and thought, what horrors have these hands wrought? Like, look at this stuff. I have a lot of games, and that's not a brag. If anything, it's a cry for help. I was in a pretty good position financially, and I used that position to fill my shelves with games. Was that a bad use of money? Yes. Do I still have that same limitless freedom today? No. If I had it to do over, would I do it the same way? Absolutely not. And the reason for that is because not every console is equal when it comes to the games I care about, specifically JRPGs. So if I were to do it again without the same freedom to buy whatever I wanted, how would I go about it? That's what I want to talk about today. Which console gets you the best bang for your buck as a collector of JRPGs? I'm going to be looking at a few different criteria. Availability of games, price of games, console exclusives, and at least for one or two, modability. That last one isn't really going to be collector focused, but it's nice to have, especially if you're looking to limit yourself to one console. And keep in mind, I could make this a 3-hour long epic and cover every video game system that's ever been released, but that sounds exhausting. So I'm just gonna go with the consoles released from 2012 and on. That means the PS4 and later. If you'd like to hear my take on the older consoles, let me know down below. And please be sure to let me know what you think of all this down in the comments too, whether you agree with my take or disagree. I love hearing from you all about what's on your minds. All right, on to the thing. The PlayStation 4 is a beast. There's no use beating around the bush. It's my biggest collection of games, and it's not even really close. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best for JRPG fans. After all, the point of this video is looking at what I did and deciding if it was the best move. So let's get into the PS4. When it comes to games, this thing is massive. The JRPG Index lists 415 JRPGs for the PS4. Now, that's including all subgenres of JRPG, including some that some people are going to argue aren't real JRPGs, but whatever. Point is, there's a lot. Now, with a pool of games this wide, you might be led to believe that it may not be all that deep. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Games like Dragon Quest XI are available on competitor systems, but the best looking version is going to be on PS4, especially if you have the PS4 Pro. And the same could be said for most cross-platform games. If you're looking for the best visuals, you pick the PS4 over the Switch every time. So while we're talking about games, let's look at some exclusives. If I miss any, please let me know down in the comments. Oh, and when I say exclusives, we're talking console exclusives. Almost everything comes to PC, that's a given. Now in this more modern era of games, even the idea of a console exclusive is becoming rare, so the pickings are fairly slim. But there are a couple of extremely heavy hitters that we need to talk about. Naturally, Final Fantasy VII Remake comes to mind as just an absolute necessity of a console exclusive. This game is incredible, especially for old school gamers who grew up with the original Final Fantasy VII. And without a PS4 or a beefy PC, you're not playing it. And another is Bloodborne, which, yes, isn't a traditional JRPG in many ways, but definitely fits the bill depending on how you look at it. People are still clamoring for a remaster or remake of that game to this day because it's so beloved. So in terms of overall JRPG content, like I said, we're looking at 415 games. One important criteria for a collector, though, is how many of those games are digital only. So once again, according to the JRPG Index, I'm going to be using them as a resource a lot. I'll link them in the description so you can check them out too. But anyway, JRPG Index shows 149 download-only games out of 415. That's 36%. Pretty sizable, for sure, but at least we're not looking at a situation where more than half of the games are completely uncollectible. The price of PS4 games makes it a pretty appealing system to collect for right now, too. If you exclude crazy limited collector's editions, there aren't even all that many that cost more than $60. If I was going to build a collection for the PlayStation 4 of just 10 games to start, these are the ones I would grab. think this would give you a nice variety of different types of JRPGs from a bunch of different popular series, and it would only run you around $226 right now. And if your budget was tighter than even that, you could swap out a couple of the more expensive games for something on the lower end, because there are a ton of JRPGs that are relatively low priced. So the PS4 is a pretty solid choice if you're big into JRPGs, but it's far from the only game in town. Let's talk about the Vita. Is beloved by its fans because it was so far ahead of its time. This was a true powerhouse of a handheld, and even though it had some sort of superfluous features, like, did we really need a rear touchpad? Regardless, it was a fantastic system. The problem was that Sony just didn't see it that way, and their support, or lack thereof, kind of negatively influenced the market and led to far fewer games coming to this thing than it deserved. Now, having said that, there are still around 220 JRPGs for the thing, and only about 40% of those are download only, so collectors still have a decent well to draw from. And while many of the games on the Vita could also be bought for the PS4, here you get the benefit of portability, and to some people that's worth paying a premium for. One of the key benefits of grabbing a Vita if you're a JRPG fan is its access to the library of PS1 classics. There are nearly 40 JRPGs in that category alone, including some of the heaviest hitters of all time, like Chrono Cross, Breath of Fire 4, and all the PS1 Final Fantasies. Sure, you're not really owning those games in the collector sense, but as a JRPG lover, it's a great option to have as a backup for when your old PS1 goes belly up. The Vita is also a dungeon crawler lover's dream. There are so many dungeon crawlers on this thing, it's a little bit ridiculous. From Demon Gaze to Criminal Girls to The Lost Child, there's a ton here if you're unlike me and don't mind getting lost for hours on end. But what about exclusives? Well, there are a few, and they're pretty unique. In the dungeon crawler genre, there's Ray Gigant, which is a super visually interesting game, and one of my favorite exclusives on the system, which is Freedom Wars. This is a sort of action RPG where you run around big arenas and blast bad guys in an effort to get your prison sentence reduced. It's such a cool and original concept for a game, it's kind of shocking Sony hasn't done more with it. And we can't forget Tales of Hearts R, the only Tales of game on the system. It's honestly one of my favorite in the series, and you can only play it on the Vita. Unfortunately, price isn't as nice with the Vita as it was with the PS4. The median price for games is double, for one. But that doesn't mean you can't still build a solid little JRPG collection without destroying the financial stability of your entire family. Here are the 10 games I'd grab if I were starting from scratch. See what I mean in terms of priciness? It's not insane, but you'll definitely feel it a bit more. That's $400 total, which, I mean, But can you put a price tag on happiness? Absolutely, and in this case, it is $400. I'm gonna do my best to talk about the modability for the Vita, but I'll fully admit I'm far from an expert. I also wanna unequivocally state that I'm against piracy, so if your desire for modding is to be able to pirate games, I think that's poopy. Sorry for the foul language. I'll link to a video in the description that does a good job of walking you through the modding process. Modding a Vita opens the door for the usual homebrew and emulator scenes, but it also gives you the opportunity to circumvent one of the Vita's biggest downsides, the super expensive proprietary storage media. Vita memory cards cost so much for literally no reason. And if that makes you as angry as it makes me, you might feel fully justified jailbreaking for that reason alone. It'll allow you to grab an SD to Vita adapter and make saving game data so much more reasonable. Now, if you're not a handheld gamer, but you still want in on the PS Vita action for some reason, then you can always spring for the PS TV. I have one myself and it's pretty great, but you really do need to jailbreak it in order to use it to its fullest. Jailbreaking will allow you to whitelist all the Vita games so that you can play games that for whatever reason never made it onto the spreadsheet of titles that Sony would allow you to play on the big screen. And besides that, it naturally opens up the same homebrew and emulator avenues that jailbreaking the handheld does. Let's quickly finish the Sony trifecta with the PS5 is the new kid in town. Well, new-ish. I guess it has been out for like 3.5 years. As you might expect for a console still in the first half of its life cycle, the total number of JRPGs is lower, only 96. Out of those, 45% are download only. That's rough, I'm not gonna lie. And for the most part, JRPGs on the PS5 are also available on the PS4. If you don't mind giving up faster load times and maybe slightly better frame rate, then going with a cheaper PS4 alternative version might be just fine for you. But in the realm of exclusives, PS5 does have a couple of extremely heavy hitters, especially for longtime JRPG fans, and those can't be ignored. First up is Final Fantasy XVI. Yes, this was a super divisive game, and yes, it's full-on action now, but seriously, this is a dark and intriguing story that pays homage to all the games that came before it, and it's worth having in any JRPG collection. And the most recent exclusive, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I can't say enough good about this game. It's truly an incredible experience, and right now, without a PS5, you just can't play it. Games are maybe not quite as cheap on the aftermarket as they were with the PS4, though they are definitely quite a bit cheaper overall than the Vita. If I were to grab 10 games to start off a collection for PS5, I might pick these. So there's a solid bunch of games for just over $300. Not bad. I mean, that's kind of looking past the fact that the PS5 is still $500, but you know, let's not think too much about that right now. Also, naturally, you could just buy PS4 games and play them on your PS5 since it's backwards compatible, but I'm trying to look at this on a per console basis. However, you should feel free to mix and match 4 and 5 to your heart's content. I don't want to be dismissive of the Xbox consoles. I know they have their fans, but if I'm being brutally honest, I think if you are primarily a JRPG player, you're not playing on Xbox systems for the most part. If you are, then I'd highly recommend you look at any of the other consoles on this list. They're just going to have more options and better options than what you're getting on Xbox. I'm going to talk about Xbox One and Xbox Series together because there's honestly just not much to say. There are around 150 JRPGs on the Xbox One with a download-only percentage of 63. On Xbox Series, there are only 73 JRPGs and 66% of them are download-only. So if you're a collector, things aren't looking good. There really aren't any exclusives. If you know of any that I'm somehow missing, please let me know in the comments. But JRPG developers sort of gave up on Xbox after the 360, which admittedly did have some pretty big titles for the genre. If I'm stuck with only an Xbox One or an Xbox Series and I have to build a collection for it, here's what I'd pick. As you can probably see, you can build a decent collection of fairly recent JRPGs for the Xbox One for cheap, just $162. And that's a lot of game for that money. On the Xbox Series, I tried, but I couldn't even come up with 10 that I'd want to have, and the prices aren't as good as the Xbox One anyway, coming in at $262. My advice to JRPG collectors is look elsewhere. The Switch is coming in hot with a cool 400 JRPGs and a download-only percentage of 46. So that's nearly the same total number as the PlayStation 4, but quite a few more download-only. Still, there's plenty there for a JRPG collector, so let's dig in a little. The Switch sort of occupies a space where it boasts almost every JRPG that the PlayStation 4 has, only portable. So Persona 5 Royal? Yep, that's here, and you can play it on the train. Dragon Quest XI? Yeah, that's here too, and you can play it on the toilet. You can expect a slight graphical downgrade on most games, but especially if you're playing in handheld mode, that's not going to bother many people. It's a surprisingly powerful machine for being so small and portable. But far beyond being an anything you can do, I can do portably sort of machine compared to the PS4, it has some killer exclusives that you will only ever see on Nintendo systems. The first series that comes to mind is Xenoblade Chronicles. The 3 numbered titles and their enormous DLCs that are almost full games on their own are all on Switch, and they are all incredible. I've talked about the work of Tetsuya Takahashi on this channel before, and he once again brings his philosophy and science fiction storytelling prowess to the forefront. Then you've got the Fire Emblem games, Three Houses and Engage. These are strategy RPG giants, and they each have a slightly different flavor that lets them appeal to different audiences. And of course, there's Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE Encore, which is the definitive version of a previously Wii U exclusive JRPG that features pop idols mixed with Fire Emblem characters with a decidedly SMT and Persona sort of flavor. And Harvestella, geez, I can't move on without plugging Harvestella once again. It's on PC as well, but Harvestella is one of my all-time favorite games, period, and it's on the Switch. It's brilliant. There are other videos on this channel where I explain why you should go watch those too. Anyway, there are a bunch more exclusives, and there have been several other timed exclusives on the Switch, and many of those are starting to make their way to other platforms, so I won't mention them here, but if you bought a Switch early on, you were enjoying some of the best JRPGs long before anyone else. For my hypothetical Switch JRPG library of 10 games, here's what I'd go for to start. That's a super solid collection for under $400. It helps that you have a lot of options for Switch consoles to buy. If you're planning to only play handheld, then the Switch Lite is fantastic. But if you want a great handheld experience and the ability to play on the television, the OLED is pricier but very worth the cost. Of the 3 major console manufacturers, it's hard to choose where I fall. Well, between Switch and PS4 at least. Sony has given us a couple of really incredible exclusives on the PS5, but other than that, it's been sort of a slow generation. There's going to have to be a lot of development in order for it to catch up with the PS4 and Switch in terms of JRPG output. But between Switch and PS4, I think I lean more toward the Switch being the JRPG ruler. Most everything on the PS4 is also on the Switch, so even though I tend to prefer the PlayStation version myself, I acknowledge that for most people, the Switch version is going to be just as good or better. In terms of sheer numbers, the PS4 maybe has a slight edge for collectors, but it's pretty small, and anyway, the Switch generation isn't over yet, so it might just catch up. Now, if cost is a concern, I think there's a much lower barrier to entry for collecting on the PS4, so that's something to keep in mind. If you're a little more flexible on the money side, then Switch is kind of a no-brainer. But if you're very privileged, then I recommend grabbing both consoles and just living it up, like Caligula, but but with video games. What do you think? Am I right to pick the Switch as the premier JRPG console for collectors? Let's talk about it down in the comments. As always, I want to thank you for watching and subscribing. I'm so grateful to be able to make these videos and interact with so many of you. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you'll come back. Anyway, until next time. Bye.